Tennessee football has been, let's call it, volatile over the past 15 years or so. From the ever-continuing hate saga of Lane Kiffin to the rise and eventual and ugly fallout of the Butch Jones era to the lack of success of first-time coach Jeremy Pruitt, Vols fans have been clamoring for some semblance of stability and identity. And they got both of those last year with the hiring of former UCF coach Josh Heupel. With Virginia Tech transfer quarterback Hendon Hooker, Heupel made the Volunteers a fast-paced, dynamic offense that was a breath of fresh air for a program that, before then, hadn't scored more than 25 points per game since 2016. But this year, in my mind, is where the real test comes in. Sure, Tennessee made an identity for themselves, but is that identity of theirs a one-hit wonder, or can they truly prove themselves to the SEC and FBS as a whole? I'm Kevin Redfield from the Dropout Sports, and before we get right into this one, I just gotta ask y'all to like this video and sub to the channel. Every bit of love is noticed and loved and appreciated, you already know. Alright, now let's get back into it. Unlike other videos I've done, I don't really want to go too in-depth on what led to this year, but I will say that the introduction of Josh Heupel into this program was just the move that the Vols needed. Heupel was known for taking guys like Mackenzie Milton and Gabe Davis and highlighting their strengths in his offense. Along with a very strong offensive run game that they had at UCF, Heupel's offensive philosophy revolved around getting the ball into the hands of playmakers so that they can do their things. A veer and shoot style, as it's called, gives more options for the offense, whether it be hot routes, RPOs, or just general passing schemes. It also helps that everyone from Milton to Dillon Gabriel and now Hendon Hooker have the legs and talent to be playmakers. With those leading teams like Alabama and Georgia becoming more score-heavy and really pass-heavy over the past couple years, it felt like only a matter of time before Tennessee needed to play copycat. So, what better guy to hire than an Art Briles copycat himself? Not the Vols are set up with an identity, but that doesn't mean that they have a future, as I think this year for them is make or break indefinitely. I mean, it's fairly obvious they have a good amount of guys that are on their last year and also NFL-worthy players. It's also a year where everyone in the nation has seen what Tennessee has to offer, so they know what's coming and they know what to scout for. So that all begs the question, will they have a sophomore slump or are they here to stay in the SEC? Well, if Hendon Hooker has anything to say about it, it's probably the latter. The highlight of this Vols team and the guy that everyone's going to be watching is Hendon Hooker. Underrated his whole career, last year at Knoxville, Hooker finally got his chance to prove himself nationally. Everywhere he was, from high school to Virginia Tech and to Tennessee, the dude has only been efficient and dynamic. With this being his final year, he's going to have to really step it up. Like, I'm talking Heisman level step it up, so that people see just how talented he is. Will he get to that level? He could put himself into the conversation with a couple of early wins on the national level, but I don't think he's going to be in that Bryce Young, CJ Stroud level of competition. With that being said though, I do think he'll continue that efficient play that he had last year and still be a steady senior presence for the Vols. Along with that leadership mentality, Hooker is going to have plenty of talent around him, whether it be primarily Jabari Small in the backfield or Jalen Wright as the RB2. Leading receiver Cedric Tillman also comes back for his junior year and possibly his last year playing in Neyland. Adding on to that trio, they may have Rue McCoy to fill in for Velus Jones. And as recently as a couple days ago, it was confirmed that Rue McCoy will be able to play opening day for Tennessee. There was some questioning of his eligibility by the NCAA based on some legal issues and the transfer portal whole thing that's going on. But the 22-year-old redshirt junior and former 5-star recruit has been confirmed, so most likely he'll be playing wide receiver 2 opposite of Tillman, and he's going to be a dangerous weapon. On defense, they have the tough job of being on the field for most of the game, but they'll have to try and catch up to their offense, especially in close games. Last year, you got the feeling, with the exception of Kentucky, that once the Vols found that offensive groove, they basically won by halftime. But in those close games where they didn't strike first or they had to go point for point, The defense just didn't have the gas to match the pace. Overall, the Vols gave up an average of 29 points per game. In losses, that number jumps up to almost 42. That's a rare margin that tells a definitive story. The front line is coming back strong this year, with leading sackmen Jeremy Banks and Byron Young coming back, as well as big boys Amari Thompson and Latrell Bumpus. The secondary, though, is a different story, as they're losing Theo Jackson to the NFL and they're coming off of a really shaky passing season. Their safeties are coming back, and Ohio State transfer Andre Turrentine is hopefully a good sign coming for the Vols. But things will have to improve all around, especially regarding those second half woes and that passing game. On to the schedule, and just like a lot of SEC teams, it's a pretty damn tough one. But they do start out with a couple of easy ones that are sandwiched in between a telltale game. In week 2, with a rematch from last year between Tennessee and Pitt at Pittsburgh, we'll tell absolutely everyone whether Tennessee is ready to compete or not at that national level. Although they may be retooling, Pitt is still the reigning ACC champions, and they narrowly beat Tennessee last year with one score. So will the Vols get revenge? Yeah, I think they do. Yeah. Pitt is losing enough, and Tennessee is, by all means, firing on offense and should be at a point where the defense can bend and not break. After that, though, I do think Florida is enough of a challenge to hand the Vols their first loss, but I think they bounce back with an LSU win. Predictably enough, they lose against Bama, beat UT Martin, and I do think that Kentucky is a worse team enough that the Vols will take this one. And then lose to Georgia. Obviously, wins against Mizzou and Vandy are in order, and then South Carolina in that second to last week is one of those games that I'm really curious about. At that point, Tennessee's going to be 7-3 in my mind at this point. And I figure South Carolina is going to be kind of in the same position, fighting for their division in the SEC. And best of all, both teams are helmed by second-year head coaches who had relatively good success in their first years. But at this point, I think South Carolina is one of those teams that is better than a lot of people make them out to be. And so, I'm giving Tennessee the loss here. So my personal prediction leaves them at 8-4 going into a bowl game, but in all honesty, I think 8 wins is the 4 that they at least need to reach. Like I said in the beginning, this is the last year for a lot of these guys, and now teams generally know what to expect when they go into Neyland. Pitt will be a necessary win, or else the rails might fall off too early to rectify. Georgia and Bama are pretty given losses, but other than that, their fate is in their own hands. A 10-win ceiling is nice, but I'm making it clear that this is Tennessee's year to prove themselves. And if they have another mid-tier season, then it might be a while before they get back to those 90s and early 2000s level of dominance. But if they buckle up and they prepare themselves and they get ready for the ride and they ride the ride, and I'm just saying random words right now, but you know what I mean, then they will be 100% back. Thank y'all for watching.
Just a bunch of dropouts.